Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you all for having me again. Right here, I am here to present House Bill 730, which creates the Fairness and Safety Act for Louisiana incarcerated workers. When I was thinking about this bill this morning, I'm sure all of you have a TikTok account, and there was actually a meme going around that basically women would ask their male partners, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And if my wife would have asked me that question, I would have said pretty often. And to that end, while preparing for this bill, I wondered if there were any actual quotes from one of my favorite authors from antiquity, Marcus Cicero, about prisoners. And the one that I found was in his book entitled On the Nature of the Gods. Cicero observed that we must remember that justice must be observed even to the lowest. And what this bill does is reduce the deductions made by work release programs from the earnings of incarcerated persons. Why? Because the people on work release are on the cusp of returning to our society, where they will be our neighbors, they will be working, productive members of our communities. This bill also creates the Incarcerated Workplace Safety Act, which makes sure that minimum safety requirements are followed when these soon-to-be free individuals are on the job. Look, the transitional work program in Louisiana works. According to statistics, only 11.1% of incarcerated prisoners who participate in the program return to prison after 1 year, compared to a 15.6% recidivism rate for those who do not participate. After all the deductions that these workers have, incarcerated persons only receive 25 to 40% of their market pay. And if we want to progress as a society, I truly believe we have to make sure that the prisoners who are going to be coming out will not be tempted to go back to a criminal lifestyle, so to speak. So in order to prevent that, we have to make sure that they are coming out and being released into a financially secure situation. And I truly believe that this bill will do its part to do that. Thank you all for your time.
I guess I want to start with, you're aware that this program by sheriffs is a voluntary program. Not every sheriff I'm aware of participates, correct?
Yes, you are
Or
correct.
you're aware that when a Department of Corrections inmate goes in this program, they reduce the amount of money that is paid to the sheriff?
Yes, I am aware of that.
So it typically, my understanding is and appreciation is that the funds that are kept from these inmates is what's paying for the program. It's offering them, whether it be a skill, they pay for their housing, they pay for their medication. In some instances, they pay part of their meals if they leave the facility. If you took some of those dollars away from the program, are you not in fear that maybe sheriffs wouldn't do the program? And then we'd have less people being able to be successful. Because one thing I do concur with you with, I do believe it is the most successful program that we offer currently in the Department of Corrections. You're in fear that if there wasn't these dollars, if you gave more to the person, the individual, that there'd be less programs to participate.
No, I don't have that fear, and I don't share that fear simply because I believe that it is a good program, and we will find a way to make a good program work. And I think that the sheriff's office would be able to, in good faith, continue to pay the incarcerated workers a little bit more and still be able to run the program. Would that have to take a little bit of robbing from Peter to pay Paul? Sure, but in order to create a safer society, I think that is an investment well worth it.
Now, you said the sheriff. You're aware that the sheriffs don't pay these individuals. These people have a job.
Yes.
And based on their income, I've heard stories of some people leave these facilities with $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to go out and start their lives. So it's based on their income.
Right.
Right. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you.
Apologize, I don't necessarily have any data with me, but I can speak to the overall regulatory process. So DOC has a standard operating procedure that it regulates and oversees all of the work release programs. You have contract and non-contract beds, so that sets the rates, the per diem rates. But essentially, there's comprehensive reporting that's required. There's on-site audits. The ACA provisions that govern our facilities also govern those local work release sites. Job-specific training for the inmates. And then the wages that are required of the employees must be comparable to what a non-incarcerated person is receiving for those jobs.
Thank you so much for that information. Rep. Knox requesting to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Laborde, if you would, what I hear you saying is that a lot of what's included in this bill, a good chunk of it is already provided by the department. Is that?
Yes, sir. So I was doing my best to, it's a pretty long bill, but there are a couple of things that are already being done in terms of the requirements for the training and the on-site audits. I do believe this would change the rates of what can be taken in terms of the what an inmate is receiving from the employer, and then what the work release operator can change. And then a couple of other things regarding things that are required to be provided in terms of it appears the uniforms or tools and equipments or things like that. So there are some changes, certainly.
Yeah, so notwithstanding the rates that you just described, for the most part, we would just be putting this into statute that the DOC is already doing.
I
Is that
wouldn't
correct?
be comfortable saying that. I was doing my best to compare it to current law, but I do think there's certainly, I'm trying to pull up my notes, I apologize. It is making some substantive changes, and I can come back in just a little while.
Sure, take your time.
and go
While you're
through
doing
those.
that, I'll ask, is there any part of this that you see that pops out that can't be worked out at your level with the author?
I don't want to speak because there's other parties involved, but we can definitely certainly go back to the drawing board and see what we can work on and bring in certainly the sheriffs, because they're probably the most impacted.
Thank you for that. Madam Chair, at the appropriate time, I'd like to move favorably.
How many work release programs are there in the state?
You know what? From my recollection and doing the research, I believe there are about 14, if I'm not mistaken. But I know we got some experts here who can testify on the specifics.
That's kind of the first question. Let's just say it's close. Why aren't there 64? If I offered to you that they're not 64 because they're cost prohibitive, even at the current rate at which the sheriffs are allowed to retain funds, they're basically mostly cost prohibitive, because while it may sound like you're taking a lot of wages, it's not enough to cover costs oft times. Probably that's why you look at it, and the bill implies that it's profitable, but if it was profitable, more sheriffs would be doing it. So I think if you look at that baseline, you may be putting some of these, we talked about the unintended consequence, at a borderline viability, financial stability, your unintended consequence may go the wrong way. Again, have you contemplated that?
I do understand your concern, but I would just kind of counter and say that if it was that cost prohibitive, I don't think the sheriffs would be doing it at all.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Bruce Riley, Deputy Director of Vote. And I would encourage you to look at the DOC's website, which we were just talking about with the previous bill. And they list 39 different transitional work programs on their site, 39 you can count. I'm not sure how expansive or slim any of those might be. I don't know any of the specific rules or programs or jobs that people are getting. I've never heard of anyone getting out of prison with $60,000 unless they went into prison with more than that. I'm not, some people are financial fraud people that go into prison and they've got millions of dollars floating around. But we're talking about people that are like kind of trying to work to save up their money, usually from a really tough situation. I myself got out of prison with about $3,000. I never went to work release. That was all just from saving all my little work monies that I could get. Got paid a lot more than people get paid here in Louisiana because I was incarcerated somewhere else. I made an entire $3 a day at my max moment. But I could tell you that $2,000 of those dollars actually went to get a driver's license because I had a lot of restrictions and things. And I had to make a tough choice. And honestly, it wasn't, if not for me going to college and getting school loans at a low interest rate, and then taking that money and living on it while I was making my little $8.50 an hour or whatever I was making at the time, I don't know if I would have made it here. And now I have a law degree, and I'm trying to inform people around the state about what's going on with different situations. So I think it's a win-win when we try to find that line between, as Rep. Bacala is saying, the costs. I think if any of us are running a business, we want to see the costs. We want to see the incomes and the costs and trying to balance it out. I don't know that we can just say the cost. I just heard it's $20 million to light up the bridge in New Orleans. Really, $20 million, right? It's like, I want to see the costs. And so in this situation, the purpose of the work release program and statute is to get people prepared for transition so they can have a shot and they can really put down that first month, that last month, maybe get that $1,500 car, maybe get that license and the insurance. It's really tough to get started from zero. And this is like the one opportunity for a few people. It's a very small percentage of people that get this opportunity. And I agree, we should try to expand it out beyond the number that there are, and there should be many more of them, because really it is the most successful program going. And if you look at any form of recidivism data, you'll see that it's the least recidivism is people who go through work release. The federal program, for instance, everyone has to go through a halfway house process when they get out of federal prison. And, I think they actually have lower recidivism rates behind that. Now, maybe they do a lot more time sometimes, depending on the crime. But the idea being there should be a transitional piece, and you shouldn't just kind of go from 10 cents a day to out on the street.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Riley. Rep. Knox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Raleigh. You spoke to some of the questions I was going to ask, but can you speak more to, I guess, the concern or potential concern that sheriffs may have and how it may jeopardize the program in their respective jurisdiction?
I mean, I'd be happy to look at the numbers.
Do we know the numbers?
I would assume they have the numbers, like what their actual costs are. I know that, for instance, if I'm making $400 a week and you're keeping 2/3 of it, let's just make it 600 for easier math, and you're keeping 400 of it, well, we know that the per diem of $28 a day doesn't even add up to that. And so you're already taking more than the per diem if I wasn't working. But we know that you still get a reduced per diem for someone who's in work release. And so unless I'm really making like $200 a week or something and you're barely getting any money from me, then it's not adding up. But I would say anyone who's working even like a $9 an hour job is giving back more money than the per diem for someone who's not working at all.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Last question, you referenced population, that it's a small population. Can you speak more to that? Because in my mind, I'm thinking it's a greater population than what one probably would imagine. But you spoke and said that it's a small population.
I believe one of my colleagues may have the actual numbers on how many people we're talking about, but it's, when you have, 40,000 people incarcerated, and there's these programs that are serving a few people. Some of the programs, I'm sure, without knowing for certain, but I'm sure there's maybe only about a dozen or 24 people in them. We're not talking about 1,000 people in work release or 500 people. We're talking about these smaller, manageable sort of units, and people are then going out. Many of them are taking the bus to get to work. They're eating outside the prison facility when they eat. And people if you have the choice between even getting a McDonald's breakfast sandwich versus getting what they're feeding you in prison, you're going to take the McDonald's breakfast sandwich every time.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Knox. And just for the record, Mr. Riley, there are thousands. In fact, it's 1,676 in the transitional work program, just so you'll know.
Well, that's probably about what percentage? 5%?
I'm not going to do the percentage. I just wanted to let you know I do know the number. So thank you.
Michael Renatz, Executive Director, Louisiana Sheriff's Association, and former commander of the work release program in Orleans Parish. That's what I did in 1976. I understand work release, and I believe it is a very viable program, a very good program, and it has evolved over a period of time. And it is at 39 today, 5 of which are privately run in association with a contract with the sheriff in those areas. Why the cost? The cost of the normal per diem is $26.39. So when DOC has to reduce their cost, and our contract cost with them now is just a little over $10, then they added the fees that were charged on the offender so that we would balance out in the middle on what the cost is to operate the program. So DOC, over a period of time, had to reduce the per diem, and they elevated fees that were assessed on the offender on the percentage of the salaries, so that it would keep sheriffs in the program for the cost. What are the costs? We have to build separate facilities for work release. We have to have separate and aside from the jail for the addition of contraband mostly. We have to separate offenders, work release offenders from secure care offenders because of contraband. Contraband in a jail is substantial problems. So the building costs are separate. The additional housing is separate. Transportation cost is substantial. When I ran the work release program in 1976, they walked out the door and they got on public transportation. They took streetcars and public buses. Today, we have to transport them because of the eligibility requirement has changed substantially. Back then, you only had an offender that was there who had less than 1 year on his sentence. Today, that time period exceeds 4 years. It exceeds 4 years. They had to open up the criteria because we were having less and less offenders that were eligible for work release. It's 1679 today, which is substantially down because of competition with other programs like reentry. You know, so all the people that now are eligible to go into work release may be in reentry, and that further exacerbates the problem why the numbers are down. But risk management is a big thing. When people have less than 4 years or 4 years or more on a sentence, the likelihood of them walking off the job, we call them walk-offs, or escaping, is great.
Thank you, Mr. Renatza. Members and audience, normally I would never go back to proponents when we've had the opponents, but it is my understanding, in fairness, it's my understanding that staff accidentally put some witness cards of individuals who wish to testify in support in the wrong slot for the wrong bill. And so in fairness, even though this goes against my OCD nature, that everyone probably knows I have, you know, we have to be fair. And these individuals, it would be Michael Cahoon, who did have a green card in support, wishing to speak. Benjamin Zucker, who has a green card, wishing to speak. Jacoby Lamar, who has a green card, wishing to speak. And Mr. Chico Yancey from Vote, who has a green card, wishing to speak. So for reasons not because y'all came in and turned in late cards, but rather a staff error. Good morning, I apologize. And y'all can decide which one wants to speak first.
All right, I'll go first. That way I get to leave first. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your indulgence going back and for
If you
working
could
through
introduce
the
yourself,
confusion.
sir.
Yeah, my name is Michael Cahoon. I'm an organizer with the Promise of Justice Initiative. Speaking in support of this bill, even if figuring out the mechanics is an ongoing discussion, I think it gets very much to an important issue in our criminal, legal, and criminal justice and corrections system. Just a couple things to note, and I'm not going to try to duplicate any past testimony, just pointing out that in 2016, the legislative auditor did an audit of the transitional work programs in the state that I think as thinking through, that came with several recommendations and a study of how it's been regulated. And as Mr. Renatza pointed out, I think a lot has changed since then. That was, about 7 years ago. And so there have been changes, especially on the kind of logistical side. But I think still a lot of those recommendations and a lot of the issues that it pointed out still persist in the system. And that's what this bill, in part, I think, is addressing some of those core issues. To speak to the issue of profit motive, some of these, about 2/3, I believe, of these programs are administered by sheriffs, and about 1/3 are administered by private, often for-profit companies. So if it's cost prohibitive or unprofitable, like companies like Louisiana Workforce LLC would not exist. They're not charities. They work because in 2016, when the auditor pointed out that the revenue combined from the 39 programs at the time was around $55 million. And, then you also have the benefit that the employer sees where, they don't pay typical benefits that they would if they were hiring someone at the rate from the community. And so they get kind of a double benefit where they get certain tax breaks and incentives from hiring through these transitional work programs, which is good because employers should be encouraged to hire transitional work programs from formerly incarcerated people. But there's a huge benefit to them there. And these jobs are it's really intended to get people the nest egg and the cost because, they're mopping floors at fast food restaurants and things like that. Some are training, but oftentimes they're not, which is why the auditor report found that 55% of people leave with less than $1,000 at the end of their time. And so I just really urge the committee and folks as we think about regulating and trying to improve this system, which does have real value, that they consult the auditor report. And there is a fiscal note on this bill, just to point that out too.
Thank you, Mr. Cahoon. I see Chair Bacala has a question. Chair Bacala.
Yeah. Do you have any idea why it would be profitable to a private entity and not profitable to a public entity?
I think there's probably an element of the profits are privatized, but the costs are publicized in this instance, where the sheriff might take on responsibilities such as the transportation and other cost-intensive issues that the contract with the being borne by the private entity doesn't include, but is covered by the sheriff. That's just that might be a reason that this business.
Well, another reason it might be is that private employers don't offer the benefits that a public employer is required to offer, such as insurance, fully covered, retirement benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very much so that a private entity can potentially profit where a sheriff cannot. So I just want to make the distinction that the costs for a sheriff are going to be higher, insurance, liability insurance, et cetera, for a public entity. The other thing, just to ask the question, and you kind of said it's mostly to provide a nest egg, I think the people I've talked to in work release, that's only half of it, maybe. It's also to provide an opportunity for somebody to have a first job and not be afraid to look for a job. I never forget a guy said, oftentimes an inmate going to the job the first day is all nervous. It's like, what if I got to go to the bathroom? Are they going to feed me? Do I get to have water breaks? They've never had a job. Maybe their parents never had a job. So it's just the idea of introducing them to what it is to have a job and being part of a workforce. And I think that's a component that we miss. Last question. Nobody has to. An inmate chooses to go into the program within these parameters, correct?
Yes.
They can choose not to.
Yes, and stay in prison, right?
Correct. It's a choice. And I'm assuming today you have a job, right?
Yes.
Do you bank 30% of your income every week?
Into savings?
Mm-hmm.
No, but I also don't live in a jail.
All. Thank you, Mr. Madison.
Thank you, Chair Bacala. And Mr. Cahoon, you noted the fiscal note, and just for the record, the fiscal note is worthless. The last line states that there's no anticipated direct material effect on governmental revenues, but if you look at the expenditure explanation above, even the fiscal office notes that there are costs contemplated that they need additional clarification for. So for that reason, I would tell you that this fiscal note is worthless, but thank you.
I want to get back to what the bill is really about. The work release is part of it. This bill is about, I have read the bill, creates the Fairness and Safety Act for Louisiana incarcerated workers. This bill is about helping men and women that's incarcerated, that when they're working in the prisons, that they be given the proper safety equipment, the proper tools to work with, and properly trained by OSHA and people like that. I'm a former incarcerated person. I was at Angola. I can remember men that was on the maintenance crew that had to go down into the sewers and clean up human waste with no protection whatsoever. We're doing all these crime acts and we're doing and keeping people in, but nobody's talked about the safety. I know men, I talked to a guy the other day that did 42 years. He's out now, he has cancer. One of his hands is kind of rotten from the waste and stuff that he had to do. This bill is about fairness and safety for the men and women that you want to incarcerate that did wrong. Rehabilitation and all these other things, they come later. Work release, I don't know anybody at Angola ever went to work release. We're talking about men and women that do these sewing machines, the females. Don't have the proper material, don't have the proper things and been trained. This is what this bill is about. I want to bring us all back. Work release and all this other stuff, we know that the sheriffs take the money. And I'm going to put this on there. If I make $100, if I was in work release and the sheriff takes 62, I got 38. That's what this is about if you're talking about the work release. When people ask me about going and their families, what you think about work release, I don't recommend anyone go to work release. Because when you get out, you're not going to get that same job. Very few people get that same job because they already know they got another body waiting to fill that spot. I'm talking about the chicken plant up in North Louisiana that people get hand cut, get the chicken waste all over with not no mask and not no goggles. That's what we're talking about. Fairness and Safety Act. Let's not get off the here. Work release is one thing. This bill is about fairness and safety. That's what this is about.
Quick calculation. I'm using so rough numbers, but I'm saying if suddenly we had about 10,000 people who we were required to pay a fair wage, which I'm calling an additional $7 an hour, working 40 hours a week for a year, the fiscal note would be $560 million a year. That's my quick math.
That sounds
Would you
accurate
say
to
that's
me.
probably close?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So my question goes, because I need the record to sort of have a final answer on this question regarding safety.
Okay.
I've heard testimony from you, I've heard testimony from opponents and proponents, and it's not consistent. But I've sat here and read about 3 cases. And what I've read in these cases says that those employees are under an obligation to provide safe working environments for those inmates who are working at their facilities. I heard you say that as well. And literally every holding that I've read this morning in these cases say that. But I've heard opposite testimony. Can you clear that up for us for the record?
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question. Are we talking about in the prison facilities or the TWP workplace operators?
The workplace operators is what the references were made.
Yeah, so no, I'm certainly not the expert on this, but as a part of our requirements for the facility operators and the employers that are that they contract with, all of the standard safety requirements that would apply to any of your workforce also apply to those inmates who are assigned to work at your business. And the same liability protections and requirements are in place. They would have the same standing, essentially.
Right,
to
that's
pursue a
what I'm
remedy.
reading. So
Yes.
thank you for clearing that up. And that liability is for those employers who have them at their facilities.
Correct,
So-
or their places of
At their
business,
places of-
right?
of
and
business,
if
right.
they're responsible to ensure the safety of that workplace environment in the same way as they are for non-incarcerated individuals. They are for people in the TWP program.
Thank you for clearing that up for me.
Thank you. Just to be clear, there are suddenly green cards coming in late. Make no mistake about it, I will not. We will place those in the record. the cards and support that I'm allowing to testify currently are cards that we misplaced that were received early on. The green cards coming in now. Thank you for being here and thank you for your green card, but we will place those in the record noting your support. We have Jacoby, Lamar, and Ronald Marshall. Thank you, Ms. Laborde.
Good morning, Chair Lady Video. I did turn the green card originally from this place. And good morning to the rest of the committee.
We could not find a green card, Mr. Marshall, and we accepted a card from you, and I allowed it, so thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to give my testimony in support of House Bill 730 and just answer some concerns that some committee members have. The bill does three things. First, it creates the safety measures for incarcerated workers. Second, it reduces the deductions earned in transitional work programs. And third, it creates the Fair Wages Committee. The fair wages that Representative Bacalot will not come into play until after the Fair Wage Committee determine what is precisely a fair wage for incarcerated workers. That will happen long down the line. To address some of Representative Fontenot's concerns, this deduction currently, Louisiana allows the state, the transitional work program to take 65% or $451, whichever is less. But the records that we pull and all the reports you have in that folder shows that there has been an abuse of taking more than that. In some cases, guys work, their paycheck was $804. The TWP took $402 for room and board, $60 for transportation, $248 for incidental fees, totaling $713. That's 88%. In another case, one guy earned $1,000. He paid similar fees for room and board, totaling $846. That's 81%. That is over the mandated 65%. When it comes to reducing that per diem, that wage earned, the TWPs earn, they have other influx of money. They have commissary. According to that audit report, they made $4.4 million in commissary. When it comes to corrections, there are two types of transitional work programs. There's the ones that contract with DOC and the ones that do not contract with DOC. The ones that contract with DOC, with the corrections guaranteed to fill their beds. The ones that do not contract with DOC, they just get people as they come in. And the difference between the money, the ones that contract, the sheriff get 11 and believe the private facilities get $15 in a per diem. And the reduced per diem is offset by that 65% that they're allowed to take from those guys' paycheck. And the point is this reduction will not tank this work facility. They get 26, the sheriff get 26 across the board for
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. I don't see any questions on the board. Mr. Lamar.
Representative Mina, I'm getting lost here. How are you defining fair wage?
I would say fair wage would be defined as something similar to what a free person would be able to get on the outside. So if a fair wage for flipping a burger would be $8 an hour, so something similar to that would be given to the incarcerated person. Maybe not the exact $8 an hour, but somewhere around that age, period.
Thank you for clearing that up, because I will tell you that's not the impression that I got from the testimony. But it clears it up for me, because for someone who goes before labor in that committee here trying to establish a fair wage for those persons that are not incarcerated. Mm-hmm. I needed that sort of assurance from you that you weren't trying to have added benefits or treat the fair wage issue and debate differently.
No, Representative.
But you're saying fair wage as it relates to what the others or those that are not incarcerated would be making on that same particular job.
Yes, Representative.
Thank you.
You know, if this bill should not pass today, I will take Representative Knox's suggestion that the bill be split up and maybe we just deal with the safety portion during the next session. So life is about learning, and that can be a approach that we can take next year.
We have a motion by Rep. Knox to pass as amended. Do we have an objection? We have an objection by Representative Fontenot. Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Representative Villio?
No.
No. Representative Adams? No. Representative Bacala? No. Representative Boyer? No. Representative Cox? No. Representative Fontenot? No. Representative Horton? No. Representative Knox? Yes. Representative LaFleur? No. Representative Moore? Representative Ventrella? No. Representative Walters? Representative Wiley? No. 1 yay, 10 nays.